I immigrated to this country with my family in '92 from Kuwait, where I was born, but I'm actually not Kuwaiti, I'm actually Palestinian. Both my parents are Palestinian, and many Palestinians had to emigrate to other countries. Because of the Gulf War, we were forced to come here. And so my dad had studied in Pakistan, but my mother had not had the opportunity to study college. So growing up for her, it was really important that we go to college. Because she was one of 7 and my grandfather could not afford to send all of them to college, so he kind of said, if I can't send all of you, I won't send any of you. And so that's what happened when we came here. What was nice is I grew up and I was really smart and good at school. So my parents were really happy about that, and I progressed. Once I got to high school, I graduated with honors, and then once that happened, the problem became that my parents did not know about American higher education. They didn't know about education in general, really. So I had to navigate it on my own. I would go to campus tours by myself. I would ask questions by myself. I kind of started to become more independent, and out of my siblings, I am the more independent one. So I really just had to figure it out, but the problem became that I can't afford to go to college. I was working part-time jobs, and so I chose to go to a community college at the time. I went for 2.5 years. I went to see advising one time, and it was a negative experience. So I decided I'm just going to advise myself. So I started following my program evaluation. I would take 6, 7 classes at a time, and graduated with a really good GPA. And I decided 2.5 years later, I'm going to transfer to Rowan University. But as you know, 4-year schools are really expensive. So I couldn't afford it, and I had to figure that out because my parents really didn't know what to do. So I figured out that I couldn't apply. I applied for FAFSA, and I did not qualify for grants, and I didn't qualify for the federal student loans because my parents made, on your tax return, it shows that they make more money than other people who were in more need. So I ended up I had good credit at the time. I worked at a bank part-time, and I really started for the last year of community college focusing on building up my good credit. And so that helped me in getting a private student loan. So I got a private student loan, and I paid my way through Rowan University. I mean, it's a decision I may have regretted later because of the student loans, but it got me to graduate. I graduated 3.9 GPA from Rowan University and top of my class. It was a really nice opportunity. My parents got to attend my graduation. They were crying because for them it meant something more than the average parent, especially my mom, because she never had that opportunity. What's nice is my mom now attends here. So she is doing 3+1 and she's getting her bachelor's degree. I've worked on pushing her to go back to school for many, many years. She was very intimidated because English is her second language, but she's now, doing it, and she's almost done, and she also has a 4.0 GPA, so I'm very proud of her. So that's really where I landed in terms of my own personal higher education experience. What was interesting is, did I mess this up? Is it good? Okay. So what was interesting is I also went to an advisor at Rowan University, and they didn't really help me much either. It just kind of luck, sometimes it's your luck of who you get, but those experiences kind of, when I ended up working in higher education, because I was initially an advisor here before I moved into admissions, I became someone who I wanted to be the advisor or the person in higher education that I could never find. So I wanted to be that resource for people, to help people, so I take it really seriously. When I sit with students, I am very empathetic. I ask them questions about what they want to do and why. Open-ended questions. Sometimes they just want an opportunity to talk to somebody. They want to feel understood. They want someone to push them forward. Sometimes you can tell that person in front of you needs a boost in their self-esteem. I had a student in my class that I'm teaching, and English is her second language. So she was very intimidated to speak publicly in front of the class, obviously, but she practiced and she did really well. And it was nice because the entire class ended up supporting her and giving her such good feedback that she was going to cry in front of the class, but tears of joy. So I make that environment for the students only because I know how hard it can be when you feel alone, because I did that. So I went through the whole experience on my own and I figured it out as I went. Now that I'm more educated on the process, there are things I would have done differently, but instead of that, or instead of reflecting on that, I make sure to share that knowledge with students that I see today. I think initially my dad, because we grew up in such a different they grew up in such a different culture, and they didn't assimilate into American society till much later in life, actually. So they raised me with their own traditions and values. So I grew up with a little bit of an identity crisis because I'm trying to navigate. I'm going to an American public school system, but at home I get a totally different, more Middle Eastern culture and background. So I was trying to navigate the two, but my dad initially was like, you know, in the end she's gonna get married, does it really matter, the education piece. But as I grew up and I started to do really, really well in school, he started to realize like, no, like we should invest in her education because she's really good at it. And so it kind of paved the way for my siblings to do the same. I always say I was like the guinea pig in the process, and then I kind of did better along the way. So it's nice because now, you know, my brother's graduated. He went to community college and graduated in an apprenticeship program. My sister goes to RCBC and she's doing nursing 3+1. So it's nice to see that both my siblings actually ended up going to community college and taking advantage of the opportunities I kind of went through. So yeah, so it was nice, but yes. It was proving that I could do it is one, proving that I could do it as a woman is another, because of the times that my parents grew up in were much different than my generation, but they grew up in a culture where they valued the boy or the son getting an education more than the girl, because he's going to be the provider of the family, those traditional roles. But now you don't see that as much. We see a lot more people doing totally different familial roles and equal familial roles, which actually is funny. My parents are now like that. They're very much equal household contributors versus how it was when I was younger. And I only remember because I was the oldest, but my siblings don't recall as much as I do. My roadblock was primarily financial. I had a really struggle with financial because my parents didn't have as much to contribute. You know, my initial dream school at the time was Drexel, and Drexel is a very expensive school. It's a private school, private university. So that's when I kind of had to look into community college. You know, I ended up, and I didn't know this at the time, that's why I'm saying I was frustrated by my lack of knowledge, but I ended up being a New Jersey Stars eligible person in high school. And I did not realize that you'd have to go to an in-county school. And at the time I lived in Gloucester and I went to Camden County College. And so I lost out on the opportunity to get my community college paid for. So that was frustrating because I was not aware at the time and I didn't have anyone advocating on my behalf. Because my parents didn't have the knowledge, unfortunately, and I didn't. And so I remember realizing it halfway through my community college experience, and basically they were like, you know, want, too late. So I was like, dang. But I worked at the bank. I used to work at Commerce Bank, now TD Bank, and I remember they had a tuition reimbursement program. So for 2 semesters, I believe I took advantage of that. So I kind of just navigated, asking a lot of questions, to my coworkers, to people in my class. But I struggled with that. I also struggled to find a sense of community. It's why that's really important for me to create here. I know it's very hard to create a sense of community and belonging at community colleges because it's such a transient student population. So I go out of my way to tell people yeah, contact me whenever you need anything or if you need to talk. Because then they feel like a sense of belonging, like there's someone here looking out for me. Or I try to make a sense of camaraderie in my classroom. So my public speaking class, when I walk in and I find that the class is talking and laughing together, I get really happy. Because the first day of class when these people didn't know one another, I now know that they've made friendships that will last them a long time, or at least last them throughout their community college experience. Because that makes you want to work harder. You get more excited about going to college, going to class. So I try to give people what I just lacked during my experience. Yeah. College was always in theory. And then once I started visiting campuses and I was like, I can see myself here, I can do this. And then, then you take the next step, let me apply for this private student loan. Oh, I got accepted, great. So then it's kind of, I looked at it as a puzzle to put things together. But it was very intimidating, I'm not going to lie. But I would always take the first step. So I always tell students come to me sometimes in fear and they're like, these are my problems and I don't know how to find a solution. So I always tell them well, you have to try to do this. If you just keep talking about how scared you are, then nothing's going to change, nothing's going to happen. So I always tell students, you need to take the first step, as scary or as intimidating as it is. But there's a quote that I love, which is, I'm gonna paraphrase, but It's the most growth happens when you put yourself in uncomfortable situations. And so for me, being on a college campus tour and seeing other students with their parents or their families, I get a little emotional because it's like you feel on your own. So it's one of those things where you're like, you know, I feel different than everybody else, but it kept pushing me. I think that's what gave me my drive, to be honest with you. So as a first-gen student, I think I really appreciate how far I've come, and I appreciate the fact that I have the opportunity to give back to students that may go through similar things or go through even harder things. And I rack my brain to find a solution, but I always say I've reached a point where I can confidently say I'm a student advocate and a student ally because of my experiences as a first-gen student. I've seen people give up on their dreams because no one encourages them to do so, or they say it's not a realistic thing, or you can't make money from it. It's happened to me many, many times. When I was younger, I wanted to be a teacher, and many people were like, there's no money in it. And so I cast it aside and I did something else, but guess what? I ended up being a teacher anyway, just 10 to 15 years later. So now I tell students, like, if this is what your passion is, I will help you find a way to make money from it or to make a career out of it. I can't guarantee it because you have to also do the effort and do the work. I can only do so much, but you also have to do the other piece. And I'm realistic when I talk to them. I think they appreciate that. I don't give them a fluff answer. I'm realistic in what they want to pursue. I give them backup plans. So for me, they walk away, they never feel hopeless. That's really my goal. I think every time I interact with a student, I never want them to walk away from me hopeless or that I closed the door in their face. Even if they can't do what they need here, I will encourage them and tell them where they can do it elsewhere. So in my profession, I think I just try to give students hope and encouragement to keep going because maybe they don't get that at home, they don't get that from their communities, and I'm the opportunity or the person that can give that to them. I will go out on a limb for a student if I feel like I can make something happen for them. I just did it yesterday. The student was absolutely floored that I could give them the solution. They were like, I didn't even think that could happen. I said, well, it's a good thing you asked. I mean, that's an example of how if you just ask, maybe we can help you. That's one. And then the second thing I wanted to mention is how alone I was in my process. Sometimes you don't have a community and it's not of anyone's accord. I've heard students say, like, my family just doesn't know. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that you can't find a way. I found a way. It was unconventional, but I did it. And there's other unconventional methods people have used to get to higher education and other opportunities. So I wanted to mention that, that I was alone in my process, but I made it happen because I asked questions. And I just would bother people with things like, okay, well, how did you do that? How can I do that? And then I got to my result, and here I am. So, I think those are the two things I wanted to mention, because some people are like, oh, that person's got their tribe and they've got their village, and I don't. So I'm the outlier. Well, I was the outlier too, and guess what? I not only did it, I did it on my own, and then I actually ended up finding my community later in my life. But that's because over time I increased my confidence and my way of learning and informed learning. Through what I learned through my higher education experiences. So you'll get better, you'll get stronger, you just kind of have to take that first step forward. My advice would be don't give up. There will be many, many a time that you will want to give up or stop. And my advice is don't do it. If you need something to hold on to, talk to so many people here. There's so many first-gen faculty and staff. There's also I've never worked anywhere where I work with people that genuinely like to help others. They genuinely like to help the students and love what they do. So I would say my first advice would be just don't give up. And the second thing is don't be scared to ask for help. I think a lot of students think they have to do it on their own and don't speak up. And I was that person. I didn't like to ask for help. I felt it made me weak, but it doesn't. It's actually, like you said, it takes a lot of courage to ask for help. And you might get an answer that you didn't expect. And you might find your possible solution to your problem. So if you don't at least, open your mouth and ask for help, you'll never know. So that's really what my biggest advice would be, is don't give up and don't be scared to ask for help.